Well, good evening everyone. Bill Gibbons here with another presentation for your viewing pleasure. Now, I made this documentary on Loch Ness some time ago for a film production company that put it on Amazon Prime. Now, as Amazon Prime are no longer accepting any new documentaries, this allows me to put it on my channel. Now, when I was narrating for this particular documentary, I had to thicken up my accent a wee bit because it's about Loch Ness after all. I'm currently putting together a new presentation on the Sachamama, which is a legendary giant serpent-like creature that lives in the Amazon. In fact, I picked up some reports about it when I was in Peru back in 2017, so it will be ready in a couple of weeks. Now, all new forthcoming documentaries will be presented along with a revamped intro to my channel, so hopefully you will approve. And please leave a thumbs up and feel free to share this video. If you haven't subscribed already, then please do so, because every little bit helps. Right now we're at 5,723 subscribers, so let's keep pushing until we get to that magic 10,000 number. So until then, thank you so much for your time and your patience and your loyalty to this channel above all. So without further ado, here is the legend of the Loch. Loch Ness, the most famous body of water in the world. For centuries, this mysterious place is said to be the home of a frightful monster that no man has been able to capture or kill. But our story begins in the distant past, when the land was occupied by a fearsome tribe known as the Picts, so called by the Romans because of their painted bodies. In the 6th century AD, the Irish missionary Saint Columba arrived in northern Scotland with 12 fellow monks to build a monastery and establish Christianity. Standing at the mouth of the River Ness, which runs into the Loch, the saint wished to cross to the other side, and sent a local man into the cold waters to fetch a boat that had drifted from the shore. Without warning, an enormous beast broke the surface and made straight for the swimming man. St. Columba boldly stepped to the water's edge, and making a sign of the cross with his hand, spoke loudly to the monster in a commanding voice. "You will go no further. Do not touch the man. Leave at once." Adam Nan of Iona, an abbot and successor to St. Columba, later wrote that the monster moved more quickly than if he had been pulled back with ropes. 500 years later, in the 11th century, Walter of Bingham, a monk from Nottinghamshire in England, made a pilgrimage to the holy sites of Scotland. Walter's manuscript, Itinerarium Scotti, or The Journey Through Scotland, reveals the author's fascination with Scottish history, customs, and wildlife. One commentator has remarked that Walter of Bingham is to Scotland what Marco Polo is to China. Walter's own encounter with the fearsome creature came one summer evening as he approached the banks of the river Ness. Seeking safe passage across the river, the holy man asked a group of fishermen mending their nets, but they rejected his request with terror in their eyes. Next, walking downstream, Walter encountered a young boy dragging his coracle along the shore. Hesitating at first, the boy agreed to row Walter across the river in return for a silver coin. They crossed the river without incident, but as Walter watched the coracle heading back to the other shore, a great beast with fire sparking from its eyes suddenly uttered a mighty roar and then dragged the coracle and its occupant beneath the water. But did Walter and the young victim encounter the fabled monster of the Loch, or was it something quite different? At that time, brown bears inhabited Britain from the Ice Age to the early Middle Ages. Here we see a Roman depiction of a bear, which they sometimes imported to Britain for sport or to put them on display. This medieval depiction of a brown bear confirms that the animals were still alive in the British Isles at that time. Is it possible that Walter observed a large bear rather than the fabled water monster of the Loch? From the earliest times, rural Scots have lived in fear of the kelpie or water horse that dwelled in the lochs and the marshes. This devilish creature would take the form of a beautiful horse and entice unwary travellers to mount it. The kelpie would then dash into the water and drown its victim. In 1527, a nobleman by the name of Duncan Campbell was hunting along the shores of Loch Ness when an extraordinary animal suddenly emerged from the water and fatally attacked him. The creature was described by Campbell's horrified companions as a dragon without feet, having fin and a tail, and moved at great speed. It is obvious that this particular monster was not a bear. The locals firmly believed in the kelpie or the water horse, but seldom discussed the matter with outsiders. Little else was heard of dragons or water horses until 1909, when 6 young children aged between 10 and 12 went exploring the dense woods along Ichnacardiach Bay, located at the south shore of the Loch. The children were hoping to find some birds' nests, but encountered something far more terrifying. As the group were busy poking around in the woods, the sound of breaking twigs drew their attention to the other side of the small bay. The children thought it was most likely a cow, or even a deer, which was common in the area at that time. But when the animal emerged from the bushes, the children were confronted by a nightmarish creature that bounded along like a seal and hastily entered the water. The terrified children ran all the way home when they related the strange story to their disbelieving parents. An elderly grandfather of one of the children had warned them to keep away from the shore of the Loch, as the kelpie might still be stalking unwary children. Decades later, 3 of the children, who were now adults, William Magruer, his sister Elizabeth Magruer, and their childhood friend Margaret Cameron, described the animal they had seen, stating that it possessed a long neck, a small head, and a humped back. This account is first mentioned by the author Constance White in her book More Than a Legend. Later, Tim Dinsdale, the celebrated Loch Ness investigator, showed Margaret Cameron a picture on dinosaurs. She picked out an image of the Brontosaurus, now known as the Apatosaurus, as the animal most like the monster she and her friend saw. Mrs. Cameron saw the monster again in July 1934, when returning from Inverness on a bus. and so did her fellow passengers. The series of lochs known as the Great Glen form a long waterway between giant mountains. These rugged mountains overlooking the lochs make building a roadway very difficult. Not until the 1930s did Scotland finally undertake a project to blast a road out of the mountains that run parallel to Loch Ness. In 1933, the new road, called the A82, was finally completed along the waters of Loch Ness and gave motorists a clear view of the loch. It was in the 1930s that sightings of a large water monster began to increase. The term Loch Ness Monster was used for the first time on the 2nd of May 1933 by Alex Campbell, a water bailiff for Loch Ness and a part-time journalist who claims to have seen Nessie no less than 18 times. However, the modern search for Nessie did not begin until August that same year, when the Inverness Courier published a report by a London business director called George Spicer. Several weeks earlier, during a motoring holiday in the Scottish Highlands, Mr. Spicer and his wife saw what he described as the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life. They described the creature as having a large body about 4 feet high and 25 feet long, with a long, wavy, narrow neck slightly thicker than an elephant's trunk, and as long as 10 or 12 feet. The bizarre creature covered the entire width of the road. The Spicers saw no limbs as it lurched across the road towards the loch, 20 yards away, leaving a trail of flattened vegetation in its wake. This sketch, based on the Spicer's description, shows a grey-coloured lumbering mass that appeared to have a small animal flapping around on its back, although this might have been part of its tail. Letters began appearing in the Courier, often anonymously, claiming second- and third-hand accounts of water and land sightings of this strange animal. The various accounts describe a monster fish, sea serpent, and even a dragon. But eventually the mystery beast became infamous as the Loch Ness Monster. On the 6th of December 1933, the first photograph allegedly of the monster was taken by Hugh Gray and was published in the Daily Express. Sir Godfrey Collins, the Secretary of State for Scotland, ordered the police to prevent any attempts to kill the animal. The photograph at first appears to show a large, indistinct grey blob, but was later thought to show a swan in the water. That year, former Royal Navy Commander Rupert T. Gould published an account of his own investigation into the mystery, including a record of reports dating back to the 1870s. In December 1933, the Daily Mail newspaper commissioned Marmaduke Wetherall, a big game hunter, to locate the monster. Wetherall allegedly found large footprints that he believed belonged to a very powerful soft-footed animal, about 20 feet long. However, upon closer inspection, zoologists at the Natural History Museum in London determined that the tracks were all left-footed and identical to that of a hippopotamus. Although there was no definitive proof that Wetherall was involved in the hoax, he was widely suspected of making the footprints with a preserved animal foot in order to increase his fame. This famous image, known all over the world as the surgeon's photograph, was supposedly taken by Robert Kenneth Wilson, a London gynecologist, and was published in the Daily Mail on the 21st of April 1934. According to the good doctor, he was admiring the loch during a holiday in the Scottish Highlands when he saw the monster, grabbed his camera, and snapped 4 photographs, of which only 2 came out clearly. The first reportedly shows a small head and a long neck, and the second shows a similar head but in a diving position. It was the first photo published around the world in newspapers and magazines that became the image of the Loch Ness Monster, and was, for the next 60 years or so, solid evidence for a great beast in the loch. Indeed, some scientists of the day speculated that the creature could well be a plesiosaur, a marine reptile that supposedly went extinct millions of years ago. On the 5th of January 1934, veterinary student Arthur Grant was riding home on his motorcycle along a road next to the loch around 1 a.m. on a moonlit night. Grant almost collided with a large, strange creature crossing the road ahead of him. According to Grant, it had a small head attached to a long neck, and when the creature was caught in the headlight of Grant's motorcycle, it bounded across the road like a sea lion and down a steep bank into the loch. Grant described it as a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur. He carefully dismounted his motorcycle and followed the animal down to the loch, but only saw ripples on the surface after the animal had hastily submerged. In spite of Grant's keen eye and detailed description, some skeptics maintain that he had observed a seal or even an otter, although it would have to have been an otter the size of a pony. Six months later, on June 3, 1934, Miss Margaret Monroe, a maid in the service of Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Pimley, owners of Kilchimine Lodge, spotted an enormous creature on a pebbly beach next to the loch. It was about 6:30 in the morning when Miss Monroe observed the animal at a distance of about 300 yards, through Mr. Pimley's binoculars. She described the animal as the largest living creature she had ever seen. It was partially out of the water and possessed a giraffe-like neck and an absurdly small head, out of all proportion to its huge body. The monster was dark grey in colour, with a white stripe down its front. It possessed large paddles and rolled its body from side to side as if warming up in the morning sun. Margaret watched the animal for an astonishing 25 minutes, until it eventually waddled back into the loch. Later, she explained her observations to her employers, who were annoyed that she did not wake them so they could see the monster for themselves. Four years later, on the 29th of May 1938, South African tourist Mr. G.E. Taylor filmed something in the loch for 3 minutes on 16mm colour film. The film was obtained by popular science writer Maurice Burton, who did not show it to the other researchers. A single frame was published in his 1961 book The Elusive Monster. His analysis concluded that it was a floating object, not an animal. However, this animation, based on the movement of the object in the loch, suggests that Mr. Taylor filmed an animate object that appeared to be very much alive. But what was it? During World War II, British military personnel were stationed at Loch Ness, and PT boats, such as this one, were used to ferry troops across the loch. One of the boats struck a large object mid-water, then disappeared in a flurry of waves. The commander of the boat believed that his vessel had struck the monster. Indeed, during 1941, military personnel made no less than 11 observations of what they believed to be large, unidentified marine animals in the loch. On the 29th of September 1952, Group Captain John Cobb, a wartime pilot with the Royal Air Force, was killed during an attempt to break the world speed record at Loch Ness in his jet-powered boat, the Crusader. During his final run, Cobb hit an unexplained wake in the water at 240 miles per hour. The Crusader disintegrated, killing Cobb, as his wife Margaret watched in horror. This photograph was taken on July 29, 1955, by Mr. Peter McNab. In October 1958, it was published by the Weekly Scotsman. The photograph shows two possible humps in the water and leaving a distinct wake behind them in the calm water, near the tower of Urquhart Castle.
I saw something beginning to surface, and in a state of very great excitement, took down the camera, fitted on the long focus lens without looking at anything. By the time I looked up, this creature was showing a black, undulating, or rather a dark-coloured, undulating creature, a live creature. I lifted the camera, took this shot, which was naturally rather hazy because I had to hold this long focus camera. There's camera shake, excitement, and all the rest. In the picture is the tower of Urquhart Castle. I understand it's a 40-feet high tower, which gives an excellent impression of the overall length of the monster. It's been estimated at between loosely 30 and 40 feet. Before I could get a second shot or anything else, as far as I remember, because it's all hazy now, the excitement was gone.
Another Highlander by the name of Torquil MacLeod was conducting a privately funded monster hunt at Loch Ness, when, on the 28th of February 1960, he had the good fortune of observing Nessie for a full 9 minutes through his binoculars, at a distance of about a mile. MacLeod observed what he likened to an outsized elephant's trunk, attached to a huge grey body, with large square-shaped paddles visible on both sides of the bulky mass. The animal was on a steep slope and partially out of the water. For about 8 or 9 minutes the animal remained quite still, but the trunk-like appendage, presumably its neck, occasionally moved from side to side with a slight up-and-down motion, just like a snake about to strike. Torquil got the impression that it was scanning the shore of the loch in each direction. Finally, the animal lurched to the left, then turned its body, allowing the astonished Highlander to observe the huge animal from the front, before it flopped into the water and dived straight into the loch, with one of its huge rear flippers dipping into the water. Finally, a major breakthrough came on April 23, 1960, when aeronautical engineer Tim Dinsdale actually filmed the hump of a huge living creature in the loch on the 5th and final day of his solo expedition. Before activating his rented 16mm Bolex camera, Dinsdale viewed the object through his binoculars and described the hump as large, reddish-brown, with a blotch on its side. As soon as he activated his camera, the object began to move, and he shot his final 40 feet of film. The film was later examined by JARIC, the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre of Britain's Royal Air Force. They concluded that the object was probably animate, with a length of between 12 to 16 feet, 5 feet in width, and stood 6 feet out of the water. Its speed was estimated to be between 8 to 10 miles per hour. Although the skeptics claimed that the hump was a boat, Dinsdale later filmed a local man in his boat on the loch for a comparison, as we can see here. The difference between the hump and the boat is obvious. Encouraged by Tim Dinsdale's success, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau was formed in 1962 to gather evidence in order to establish the existence of the loch's famous inhabitant, and was eventually disbanded in 1972. In 1969, Frank Searle, a former professional soldier from London, set up camp on the shores of Loch Ness and began his own full-time search for the monster. Searle spent over a decade living alone in a tent and later in a small trailer.
Of all the banks and braes of bonny Scotland, none holds more fascination than the murky waters of Loch Ness and its fabled monster. One man who firmly believes in the legend is a lowly Sassenach called Frank Searle. For 7 years, Londoner Searle has scanned the loch for sight and sound of its elusive tenant. He's a firm believer that the monster or monsters exist, and his Lochside Museum sustains interest in Nessie herself. Sightings of Ness's submarine beast range from the report by St. Columba in the 6th century to Sir Peter Scott's artistic interpretation of recent American underwater photography. Frank Searle has written a book on the subject. Interest in Loch Ness's popular beastie never seems to wane, and since 1930, the sightings, though irregular, have been strangely persistent. Of course, for almost half a century, Nessie has been a cartoonist's dream. Frank Searle doesn't scoff. One day, patient vigilance will bring him and that bashful monster face to face. Who can tell? The monster may be as really a nice, friendly soul. Only the dark depths of Loch Ness hold the answer. One man waits for that ultimate rendezvous.
And after producing several photographs of what he claimed were different monsters, but under scrutiny, most, if not all, of his photographs were later declared to be crude hoaxes by the more professional Nessie hunters. This eccentric but colourful character wrote a book and produced his own documentary on the Loch. He eventually abandoned his quest in the early 1980s to embark on a treasure hunt in another part of the world. If nothing else, Mr. Searle added some colour to the hunt for Nessie. In October 1971, 14 centuries after St. Columba, another clergyman observed the fabled beast for himself. Father Gregory Brucey, a long-time music teacher at the Fort Augustus Abbey, experienced his own dramatic encounter with Nessie. Like most Nessie sightings, it happened unexpectedly as Father Brucey strolled the Abbey grounds with a visitor to the Abbey, Mr. Roger Pugh. Both men observed a long neck appear on the surface and move along the flat calm loch for about 10 seconds before silently dipping under the water.
We had an organist friend out from London, and we were standing on the edge of the loch on the stone jetty looking across to the bay on the right, and we were suddenly surprised. First of all, there were no boats visible at all. Suddenly noticed a tremendous commotion in the bay, and we couldn't see what was causing this at first. And then we were fairly staggered to see a little further on a huge neck emerge. We would both agreed about 7 feet at least above the water, at a slight angle, moving along slowly for about 17 seconds, we estimated, and then it went down. We didn't see any of the body, but this height out of the water was extraordinary. In fact, this organist said to me, he said, if I hadn't been there, he'd have felt like running. It gave him such a queer feeling.
Well, if they're drying up the falls, perhaps someday they'll drain Loch Ness in Scotland, and maybe we'll learn the truth about the Loch Ness monster. There are reports tonight that a submarine may be used in the search for the beast. Howard has been to Loch Ness and sides with the monster against the sub. Howard?
They've ruined the moon as a source of magic, so I say leave the Loch Ness monster alone. First of all, they probably can't find it. The lake is a long, very deep, narrow gash of black water, hard to plumb. And second, the publicity will stimulate reporters to invent stories and reduce the monster's credibility. On one past occasion, one of my colleagues, hard up for a story, borrowed an elephant foot ashtray from a friend, made prints in the mud, and then photographed them as tracks of the monster. The story and the monster were discredited when it was realized the beast would have to have 2 left feet to make those tracks. From many interviews with people who live on the Loch and who have repeatedly seen it, I believe in it. Here are their impressions of it. It may well be a large descendant of the dinosaurs. It may live most of the time in underwater caverns where there's air. Its length may be about 100 feet, a third the length of a football field. It is able to move through the water at an estimated 30 to 50 miles an hour. One of many people who saw it was a bank manager from nearby Inverness. The day after the paper carried his report about it, the paper received this letter. I should like to confirm the bank manager's report. From my viewpoint down in the Loch, I could see him distinctly on the shore. Signed, the monster. Frank?
Thank you, Howard. That's tonight's news and comment. Good night.
Later, in 1972, a group of researchers from the Academy of Applied Sciences in Chicago, led by lawyer Robert H. Rines, conducted a search for the monster, involving a sonar examination of the Loch for unusual activity. A submersible camera with a floodlight was deployed to record images below the surface. On the 8th of August, the sonar unit, anchored at a depth of 36 feet, identified a moving target estimated to be between 20 to 30 feet in length. The camera was activated by a large object and subsequently photographed the hind quarters of a huge animal, including a flipper, along with the rough textured skin of the animal that was a greeny brown in color. Experts estimated the flipper to be from 6 to 8 feet in length and 4 feet in width. In 1975, the biggest breakthrough for Dr. Rines and his team came when a set of close-up underwater photographs were taken. British naturalist Sir Peter Scott announced in 1975, on the basis of the photographs, that the creature's scientific name would be Nessiteris rhomboteryx, Greek for Ness inhabitant with diamond-shaped fin. Sir Peter intended that the name would enable the creature to be added to the British Register of Protected Wildlife. But without an actual specimen to study, the name was not accepted by mainstream scientists. In August 1977, Peter and Gwen Smith were visiting the Loch on holiday, when Peter filmed what appears to be the head and neck of Nessie as the creature rose and plunged into the water. The couple noticed that the head moved from side to side before the animal plunged under the water and did not reappear.
Well, we were standing on the south shore of the Loch, some way up here, looking across the Loch. Peter was looking down at an oil drum somewhere further down, and I was looking across at the castle, just having a look at it, and this thing suddenly came vertically up out of the water.
Well, my first impression was of a periscope-like object which had a slight lean to it in the water, although the head part seemed to be held horizontally. It appeared to rise up a considerable height, at least the height of a man, and it was, I would say, a good foot thick.
With the naked eye, it was just a black pillar shape with a rectangular-shaped head on the top.
At one point, I watched it actually turn its head through about 90 degrees, because normally it was in profile, but the head slowly turned round until it appeared as though it was either looking directly at us or directly away from us. And when it did this, it appeared to be the same thickness as the neck. It disappeared as a separate entity, and then it turned back again the same way as before.
Tim Dinsdale, the celebrated Loch Ness investigator, had 2 brief head and neck observations of Nessie himself in the 1970s, as he explains here.
I saw an object about 250 yards away, as near as I can guess, which came out of the water, sort of At first I thought it was a cormorant's neck, but then, of course, you could see that it wasn't a cormorant because it was too big, and it came out like a black snake, like a black anaconda. That's what it looked like. It came out of the water like that, and then it went down, and there was a boil of white foam. And then it broke surface once again with a boil and went on. I didn't see it again. Very quick, seconds, but it was real. And it had a startling effect on me, as it does, I think, when you get moderately close to these things. It suddenly becomes tremendously alive. And the first thing I did was put my life jacket on. You see, I don't normally wear one because you can't live in them, quite frankly. I've got them around. But the first thing I did was put it on.
5 years later, in the summer of 1982, Canadians Jennifer Bruce, her husband Gordon, and her mother visited Loch Ness on a vacation in Scotland. While they did not see the fabled beastie, Jennifer took a quick photograph of the loch before leaving the area. Later, when the photograph was developed, a long sinewy neck appeared in the photograph. The image was subjected to careful digital analysis by Roland Watson, a Glasgow-based Loch Ness investigator, who determined that the head and neck was about 2 meters in height and was between 17 to 22 meters distant from the location where the photograph was taken. Many of the so-called head-neck sightings of Nessie are almost always very brief, with insufficient time to take a photograph. Roland believes that Jennifer took her photo of the loch just as the head and neck briefly broke the surface, before diving underwater. Although the skeptics were quick to dismiss the photograph as that of a bird, Mr. Watson set to work, comparing and superimposing images of known birds that live around Loch Ness, comparing them to the Bruce photo in size, dimension, shape, and coloration. It became clear that none of these could compare to the size and morphology of the head and neck. On October 9, 1987, Operation Deep Scan was launched with 24 boats equipped with sophisticated sonar equipment and deployed across the length and width of the loch in an effort to detect any large animal in the depths. The sonar units could pick up underwater objects as small as 12 inches at a depth of up to 1,300 feet. On the first day, the boats detected 3 strong sonar contacts with a large unidentified object moving at a depth of between 256 feet to 590 feet. The object was larger than a shark, but smaller than a whale, but it was bigger than anything that would normally be found in a Scottish freshwater loch. Adrian Shine, the project leader, speculated, based on the size of the object, it might have been a grey seal, but this could not be verified. In 1993, Discovery Communications, a film production company in the UK, subjected the original 1960 Dinsdale film to digital enhancement and revealed that there was a long trailing body of the creature just behind the hump and just under the surface of the loch. A year later, in 1994, it was claimed that the infamous surgeon's photograph was apparently a hoax by Marmaduke Wetherall, who sought revenge for his humiliating treatment at the hands of the Daily Mail in 1933. The monster was apparently a plastic and wooden head attached to a toy submarine like this one, and its head and neck were made from plastic wood. The photographic plates were passed on to Colonel Wilson, who took them to an Inverness chemist, then later passed on to George Morrison, a friend of Wilson, who then sold the first photo to the Daily Mail. Little is known of the second photo. It is often ignored by researchers who believe its quality is too poor and its difference from the first photo is too great to warrant analysis. It shows a head similar to the first photo, with more turbulent wave pattern and in a diving position. Some people still believe that the photo is genuine. On the 26th of May 2007, 55-year-old laboratory technician Gordon Holmes videotaped what he said was this jet black thing moving fairly fast in the water.
Now, an amateur scientist believes he could have captured the Loch Ness Monster on videotape. Yorkshireman Gordon Holmes was carrying out experiments at the famous Loch when, by chance, he happened to spot a strange creature in the waters. Now, film of the incident is causing a sensation. Well, we can now join our own Nessie hunter by the shores of the Loch, Mokele-mbembe. Nicola, it seems Nessie's back in time for summer.
Well, Kirsten, the legend of the Loch Ness Monster dates right back to 565 AD when St Columba was said to have seen a strange monster in the waters behind me here. Now, since then, tales of Nessie have surfaced regularly and she's become something of an icon right around the globe. So whenever there are tales of new sightings, it sparks something of a frenzy, and it's certain that these new pictures will already be causing a stir. And as you can see for yourselves, there's definitely something in the water.
Could this be the Loch Ness Monster? This footage was taken at the weekend by an amateur scientist who happened to spot a fast-moving creature swimming across the world-famous Loch. Gordon Holmes from Yorkshire had been undertaking some amateur scientific tests on the Loch, recording sounds from the deep with special hydrophonic equipment. But nothing prepared him for the prospect of actually setting eyes on what could be the elusive Nessie, an event he luckily captured on film.
I suspect that if they can't quite figure out quickly what it is, it'll take years for them of continual argument, and who knows, if it turns out to be an unknown creature, unknown species, that's going to flood the local tourism in the area.
Gordon took his tape to local experts who say it warrants further scrutiny, and so far the jury's out.
It has the appearance of an animal of some sort in Loch Ness. The issue, of course, is how big is it and what is it? And I'm afraid that is going to have to await some further assessment. There are, of course, a number of creatures in Loch Ness that can give rise to wakes, and they would include otters, seals and waterbirds.
Gordon hopes to have the tape further analysed to try to get to the bottom of the Nessie mystery. But even from a scientific viewpoint, he believes the Loch Ness legend stands up to scrutiny.
Of all the things that are sort of unknown, I think the Loch Ness Monster is the one that's got the most credibility due to reliable witnesses in the past, and also due to these sonar contacts. I mean, you just can't throw those kind of ideas away and ignore them. I think you need science to look deeper into it.
So could Nessie have been captured on film? Well, no doubt the images will undergo further analysis as people try to work out what the creature is. But in the meantime, it's another mystery at the heart of Loch Ness.
There are approximately 31,460 lochs in Scotland, and at least 8 of them are reputed to be the homes of strange water beasts. These include Loch Lomond, Loch Oich, Loch Shiel, Loch Lochy and Loch Morar. Loch Oich and Loch Lochy are both connected to Loch Ness through the Great Glen, so it's not surprising that Nessies, or whatever you wish to call them, might still be present in other nearby bodies of water. And Loch Morar, a large but very clear body of water, has its own monster, affectionately known as Morag. So the question remains, what could Nessie actually be? Many different identifications have been offered over the years. A giant eel is the most common suggestion, but an eel, no matter how big, does not match the description of Nessie's bulky body and large flippers or webbed feet. It has also been suggested that Nessie might be a giant sturgeon. This beluga or European sturgeon was captured in 1922 in the Volga estuary in Russia. It was 23 feet long and weighed over 3,473 pounds. But sturgeon do not climb ashore. And besides, They look absolutely nothing like Nessie. The late Dr. Roy McCall, a former professor of microbiology at the University of Chicago and a top cryptozoologist, speculated that Nessie could be a zeuglodon, an early whale, but the description of this presumed extinct marine mammal does not match Nessie's bulky body, long neck, small head, and flippers. Could Nessie be a seal? Indeed, seals have been spotted in the loch on several occasions, and this photograph, while at first glance appears to be Nessie, is in fact 3 seals swimming along in a line. This still, taken from video footage, shows another seal at Loch Ness. Perhaps they are misidentified as Nessie from time to time. Elephant seals have also been suggested as misidentified monsters, but if we compare these 3 images to our Nessie composite, the long neck and tail does not match these well-known marine mammals. So whatever Nessie might be, she is certainly not a giant otter, a grey seal, an elephant seal, a hippopotamus, or even a floating log. However, grey seals can grow up to 10 feet in length and weigh up to 680 pounds. If they can enter and leave Loch Ness, then why not juvenile Nessies, perhaps following migrating salmon as a prime source of food, or perhaps even moving from Loch Ness to Loch Lochy and Loch Oich. This is a possibility, considering that there have been many long-necked sea serpent sightings around the world. And we will tackle that topic on another occasion. There is a twist to the Loch Ness phenomenon. The late Aleister Crowley was a practitioner of the occult and lived in Boleskine House overlooking Loch Ness. Crowley, who called himself the Great Beast and was once called the wickedest man in the world, was an influential figure and author in the realm of ceremonial magic and the occult, inspiring countless followers to immerse themselves in such practices. Naturally, Crowley's former residence of Boleskine House is alleged to be haunted or cursed, and was reportedly used for satanic rituals and black magic ceremonies between 1899 and 1913. The house was later owned by Jimmy Page, lead guitarist of the rock group Led Zeppelin, but it burned down in December 2015. Could any dark forces still linger at the site? Other strange creatures, some that defy logical explanation, have been observed from time to time around the loch. This account took place a year before the Loch Ness Monster first began to appear in the newspapers. In April 1932, Lieutenant Fordyce and his fiancée travelled to Aberdeen to attend a family wedding. At the conclusion of the function, the couple decided to enjoy a short motoring tour of the Scottish Highlands. As the couple drove through a heavily wooded area near Loch Ness, they were startled to see an enormous animal coming out of the woods on the left, making its way across the road about 150 yards ahead of them towards the loch. It had a gait of an elephant, but it looked like a cross between a very large horse and a camel, with a hump on its back and a small head on a long neck. Lieutenant Fordyce stopped the car and followed the creature on foot for a short distance. The animal possessed a grey shaggy coat, and its long thin neck gave it the appearance of an elephant with its trunk raised in the air. Lieutenant Fordyce followed the animal into the woods for a short distance, but thought that discretion being the better part of valour, returned to his frightened fiancée, who was still in the car. The couple thought that a strange animal was an escaped freak from a menagerie or a zoo, but no other reports of this freakish creature appeared in the newspapers. Or might it have been a water kelpie, the shape-shifting demonic entity that so terrified generations of Highlanders from the days of the Roman Empire all the way through the ages to the early 20th century? There have also been several UFO sightings around Loch Ness over the decades, such as these two large discs that were photographed by English couple Alan and Anna Betts on April 29, 2017. The Betts did not see the discs when they took their photograph, but a later analysis estimated that the discs were passing over the loch at an altitude of about 900 feet. The Betts did not see the discs when they took their photograph, but a later analysis estimated that the discs were passing over the loch at an altitude of about 900 feet. Coupled with the strange beast observed by Lieutenant Fordyce, such things only add to the mystery of the loch and its surrounding area. But who knows? Perhaps one day you will have the good fortune to photograph or film a bizarre creature stalking the woods near the loch, or perhaps encounter Nessie sunbathing on the shore, and become infamous as the person who solved the age-old mystery of the Loch Ness Monster.